What could be something in your business that could completely explode it in a way that would blow your mind? And in fact, the same thing that actually helped explode my business at Money Ripples. That's what we're going to talk about today. Hello, my fellow Ripplers. This is Chris Miles, your cash flow expert and anti-financial advisor. This show is for you, those that work so hard for your money, and you're now ready for your money to start working harder for you today. You want that freedom and cash flow now, not 30 or 40 years from today, but you want it right now so you can live that life that you love with those you love. But most importantly, guys, it's not just about getting rich. It's about really living a rich life, because as you have more resources and you become more financially independent and free, you can now bless the lives of those around you. And that's exactly the ripple effect I'm here to create in your life today. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being a part of this, binging on our episodes. You guys have been amazing. Hey, if you haven't gone on recently, be sure to go to our website, moneyripples.com. Check that out. Guys, we got so much good content there for you. So if you want to go deeper down the rabbit hole, learn more than just getting some of these podcasts, go check that out right now. Okay, guys, so I'm excited about this guest. It's actually one that we've made sure we try to get on because often, I talk about finances, right? It's no surprise. We talk about real estate investing quite a bit, but I know a lot of you guys are business owners and a lot of you are looking for ways to grow and scale your business bigger, right? Well, I'll share with you my secret. And my secret has been this podcast. And more importantly, the secret that I learned after I started doing my podcast was how I get on other people's podcasts. And so I get asked by people all the time, many of you as well, some of you listeners that will ask me, hey, how do you get booked on all these different shows? You can pay people tens of thousands of dollars to do it, or you can use a service that Alex Sanfilippo uses, or actually is really the founder of, which is PodMatch. And I want to talk about that today and really talk about the power of podcasting and how that can work in your life. Even if you don't have a podcast, how it can actually build and grow and scale your business to levels that you may never thought possible. So excited to bring Alex on here today. So Alex, welcome to our show.
Chris, thank you so much for having me. By the way, I do use PodMatch. I also happen to be the founder of it, but a fun inside thing of that is that I actually pay for my own PodMatch account out of my personal credit card. And people think that's crazy, but I'm like, I want the full experience because
Yeah.
it's really helpful for me too. So I really appreciate the kind words and absolutely love what you're doing here. I've been listening to the podcast a lot, and it's just, you've done an incredible job. Like, I get why this drives a lot of things for you because there's so much value here.
Well, I mean, I got to tell you, and I've said this before off the air, but I mean, dollar for dollar, I've gotten more value from your service than anything I've done. And I'm actually a part of 3 different services, so everything from like paying $7 or $30 a month to like just barely over for yours, plus, even like paying like tens of thousands of dollars, getting booked on podcasts. And I think dollar for dollar, I've got way more value, way better connections than anything. So
Man,
thank
thank
you.
you.
I appreciate
Seriously
that.
makes my day. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about your story personally. I mean, what even got you down this direction, this path?
Sure. I actually came from the corporate world. So a lot of people think like you're born an entrepreneur, right?
Huh?
And for me, that wasn't really the case. And maybe I was, but I either way, whatever it was, I did a 15-year sprint, if you will, in big corporate. And I really enjoyed my time there. But nearing the end of it, I knew that I wanted to not be a corporate guy for my entire life. I like the
Yeah.
building opportunity of it, but once I hit a certain level, I kind of feel like I leveled out, and I was just like, man, this is kind of like this is it. Like I've climbed the ladder, and it just I don't know. I loved it. It was bittersweet the day I left, but I knew there was something else, and so I got into podcasting. And Chris, you'll appreciate this. I got into podcasting to get free coaching advice from people that I couldn't afford, but they'd come on my podcast and talk to me. So I was like, man, you know what I want to do? I want to become an entrepreneur. So I'm going to interview people who have successfully left a corporate 9-to-5 job to become a full-time entrepreneur, to ask them how they did it and how they'd suggest someone else doing it as well.
It's
And
crazy because you're not the first person I've talked to that's done that. I know John Lee Dumas with Entrepreneurs on Fire, same exact thing, right? He wanted that short interviews, but he wanted to basically get free advice, so to speak.
yeah, and I mean that guy, I've had the opportunity to hang out with him a few times and meet him and his wife. Absolutely brilliant. And he's like, I'm a product of my podcast. Like, I'm like, yeah, no kidding. Like after thousands of interviews, like you're like a genius, right? And maybe he was before. I don't know. But for me, what I realized, I didn't know where I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I realized was how to become one. And I'll very quickly share the 4 steps that I learned. It was find an area of passion. get into the community of that area of passion is step two. So it's passion followed by community, followed by finding a problem, a simple problem that that community is struggling with. And the final step four is to offer the fastest possible solution. And so for me, what I realized is in that journey I was on, I became very passionate about podcasting. And I was like, man, I think I want to be an entrepreneur in podcasting. Is that even a thing? Right? Like, could this be it? And so I remember really getting the community. I started speaking at conferences, and I'll never forget this. It was actually the beginning of 2020, right before the world shut down. I was speaking on a stage and there was about 2,000 people in the room. It was all podcasters. And when I got off stage, I had pen and paper in hand. And anyone who would talk to me, I just asked them, hey, what are you struggling with right now? Because I wanted to apply this framework, right? I became passionate about podcasting. I found the community. I was in the community. And now I had this opportunity to be on a stage asking them, what are you struggling with? And Chris, I heard a lot of things, but there was one commonality. And I heard it 100 times. And that's when I stopped asking the question. And people said, I'm having trouble finding the right guest for my show. Now, a lot of people have podcasts. They're like, yeah, I can find guests. I'm like, yeah, but the right guest is the problem, right? My
Right.
15-year-old cousin would love to be on this podcast, but should he? No, right? And
Yeah.
so basically, I went home with that, and that's how we created PodMatch. Because I remember I wrote it down on the whiteboard. What we kind of ended up with, and I say we, it was me, my wife, and a business partner. What I said was like, what if we developed something that was like a dating app, but instead of connecting people for dates, it connects them for podcast interviews. It puts that guest and host together, handles all the administration between it, so that they can just spend time behind the microphone like we're doing today. Because I found the more time that people do that, the more value gets added to the listeners. And so that was kind of the journey. Ultimately, within just a 6-month period of time of launching, I went from corporate C-suite guy to going full time as an entrepreneur. And not that I like replaced my income in that time, but the writing was on the wall. So I took that risk and made that jump. And that was the idea. Finished whiteboarding it out and starting on it on March 10th, 2020. June 15th, 2020, we launched an early beta. And December 7th, 2020 was my last day, my corporate job. And from then on, I've been full time in podcasting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant idea. I mean, you kind of created your own like version of, not to cheapen it, but your own version of like Tinder for podcast guest and host, right? Like you can kind of choose to match or not. I love it has that option because there's times I'll be reached out by a certain podcast host. I'm like, no, that's not a good fit. And vice versa. Even though there's times I'm like, I think I'd be a great fit for that show. And then sometimes they choose not to match with me for whatever reason. And I love the concept because you really do make it once you understand the system, it really does become a very simple process.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. And that's really important to us is always learning to simplify it. And we've improved over and over, right? Like we continuously find better ways to do that. And it's funny you mentioned Tinder. We did model it off a dating app. We used Hinge, but I've been married too long to use a dating app. So I actually like asked one of my buddies, I'm like, can you show me this dating app website? And it's funny, he's like a really loud guy, but he was like real quiet. I'm just watching him use it. And then he just puts down his phone and goes, hey, dude, I got to ask you a question. I'm like, yeah, what's up? He goes, are you and Alicia okay? Which is my wife. I'm like, yeah, dude, we're fine. Why? He goes, why are you so interested in this dating app? Right. So that's kind of how we model it. Now we kind of, a lot of people have told us, hey, you're more like Airbnb or you're more like Amazon. Cause I guess some of these dating apps have some, some negative press around them. But anyway, I digress. It's been a really fun thing to be working on. The community is absolutely beautiful that's behind it.
If you've been following this podcast, you're probably looking for great ways to create passive income right now, right? Well, we got you covered here with Central Lending. Central Lending specializes in alternative investments that actually are designed to create steady returns and long-term financial security for you and your family. Now, they prioritize transparency. They love, building those strong relationships, giving you that confidence and peace of mind, knowing that you have your money working harder for you, so you don't have to work so hard for that money. You want to learn more how to do that? Go to centrallending.com and check out what they've got today to create your passive income and wealth creation right now. Yeah, like you, I've never even used a dating app, so I wouldn't even know how to use one if it happened, right?
Right.
Uh, but it is kind of clever how you did your site and kind of modeled it similar to that way, to make it that simple for people to, really match up
Yeah.
with the right podcasts and right guests. Let me ask you this. I mean, why do you feel like, yeah, because I don't think podcasting's for everybody. I don't think everybody should be a podcast host, but I think a lot of people should be a podcast guest for sure. Why do you think that's so important in today's world?
There are so many reasons, but if one of the main reasons I think is just like that people don't think about when it comes to being a podcast guest is the ability to really hash out your own story and to learn to articulate it really well. Like if you got no quote unquote ROI, return on investment for being a podcast guest, other than the fact that you became more well versed in sharing your story with other people, that to me is totally worth its weight in gold.
Yeah.
I just shared a story a moment ago with you. and I condensed it down to maybe 2 or 3 minutes of my 15-year journey and becoming an entrepreneur, right? Like, yeah, there's a longer version of that, but the first time I told that story to somebody, it took me like an hour and a half and was full of, and I think, and right? Like you learn to articulate in a way that people actually want to hear it and listen. That alone, like put everything else aside, like that is so worth it when it comes to being a podcast guest, is that ability to be able to share in that way. Right alongside that, the other one I'll mention, and Chris, I'm actually interested in hearing your answer to this as well. But the other thing is being able to figure out um, where the miscommunication is happening or anything that makes people like not fully understand. Because if I just explain PodMatch to you and you're the host and you're like, so am I understanding correctly? And you saying this, and I'm like, no, that's not quite it. Next time I share about PodMatch, I'm going to get better at it. Right. So it gives you the ability to actually learn from somebody that can teach you how to be better at what you're doing because you can hear the questions that are being asked or like hey, can you clarify this a little bit? You're able to learn that yourself. To me, those are some of like the non-tangibles when it comes to being a podcast guest, but I think that we don't talk about those enough. But those are two things for me that have been really, really key above anything else I'd say. But Chris, if you don't mind, I'd love. Do you have something specific that you think? Because you've been on a lot of podcasts, you've done really well in this space yourself.
Yeah, I guess I was trying to mentally count. I'm like, how many have I been on? But usually I'm on at least 100 a year. So I'm sure it's been hundreds if I haven't got into the thousands, low 1000s, at this point. But no, I like what you said too. I never even thought about how it does allow you to articulate because it almost forces you into creating sound bites, right? Which is what nowadays in media you need more often because the sound bite is everything, right? People don't want to have to listen to this explanation that takes 10 minutes. Can you say it in a matter of seconds, to capture somebody's attention? But for me, I mean, I think for me it was 2015. It was the big epiphany for myself. I mean, 2014, I got on John Lee Dumas's show for the first time, right? I've actually been on 4 times now. The fourth time I just did this year. So out of those thousands, I guess I got 4 of those, all sprinkled in a little bit. But the first time I got on, it was so much fun. I remember telling a friend, I thought, you know what, I should I should probably do a podcast again because I'd done one starting in 2008 and then quit in 2012. And then 2014, when I did his interview, I thought this would be so much fun. Maybe I should do it again. And my friend said, well, then do it. Just do it. And that was on a Friday. We had lunch. The next Tuesday, I recorded my first episode. I was like, all right. I'm like, I just went the simplest path of least resistance, found Blog Talk Radio, just started doing it. I even did it like on the live version, which was a horrible sound quality. I don't know if it's better now, but I learned to eventually pre-record. So, I mean, it was horrible. Like, I mean, if you go find those initial ones, like on Blog Talk Radio, I mean, like those first episodes are like rough. It sounds like I'm literally talking on a phone. But I did it. And then, of course, it was the second time I got on Entrepreneurs on Fire with John Lee Dumas, which was right around 2016. And I realized, I said, you know what? Drove people to my website the first time, which created a nice little spike on my website. What if I drove them to my podcast? Because I said, listen, if they like my stuff, maybe if I drive them to the podcast, it becomes more of a nurturing type of tool. Because like you said, people kind of connect with you a little bit. They like what you say. They want to follow you. They want to learn more about it. And then, of course, from there, then they kind of go down that little rabbit hole, right? And they keep learning more and more to the point where they finally get to where they say, you know what, I think I might trust you. Like, I think I want to try you guys out. And so I drove them to my podcast instead, and of course spiked my podcast numbers, which is always great. But from that single interview, it was just a few months, probably like 4 months later. It wasn't like that week. It was 4 months later. Someone reached out and says, I want you on my podcast. So I got on his podcast and I just happened to mention like oh, by the way, a little teaser at the end. I said, oh yeah, we do this too. We do this like infinite banking strategy as well with real estate investing. And he's like, I need you to have it back on a second time. So he got me on a second time. And that podcast was so good that he ended up becoming a client. And then he referred me to another guy that had a podcast. He got me on, and then that guy became a client. And then that guy actually started referring all of his network. And I've literally, from that one episode with John Dumas, right? I mean, that one episode has made me over probably $4 million to this date, in just the last, what is it, 2017, like, 7 years. So for me, I think that's the power of podcasting, is just the fact that it does allow people to really come to know you, know, like, and trust you. And I love it because if people don't like you, they don't get to tell you that. They don't have to tell you to your face, just move on, and find somebody else. Right.
Man, that know, like, and trust factor, that's everything. And you don't need to get on like Entrepreneurs on Fire. Like that is one of the biggest podcasts out there, but you don't necessarily have to do that. I've been on
No.
shows, and I'm sure you have as well. There's 30 people who listen to it, but they're absolutely the right 30 people that you want to develop that know, like, and trust with. Whether you're the guest or the host, you have the opportunity to build that. And we live in a world today where people have a lot of mistrust. They're guarded online, especially. But if they can listen to you talk for 20 minutes, they should know if they know, like, and trust you, right? They can kind of make that assumption whether that you're for them or not. And it's not that we want to be for everybody, but we want the people that we say, yeah, I'm for these people to say, you know what? I know, like, and trust this Chris guy. Like, I can just tell there's something there. I want to work with this person. Like, that's a beautiful thing to be able to have the opportunity on a podcast. Again, as a guest or host, to figure that stuff out. Like, that really is the beauty of it. And I want to quickly call out one of your episodes, actually. You had
Mhm.
Christina Wise, I believe was her name,
Yeah.
and she
Yeah.
was talking about going from, like, needing handouts, like living in like a one bedroom thing to financial freedom. And she just shared like something that I thought was super transparent that made me trust her a lot more. It's about growing up with no money, then making a lot of money, and then money still being the problem. And then eventually needing to, I'm not going to spoil it all, but like splitting ways with her husband, and they fought over possessions, money, right? And she's like, why did all this matter? And man, like, did that resonate with me? Like, it just kind of hit home when I was listening to it. I'm very much so likely to reach out to Christina and want to actually do something with her because I really resonated with what she shared. And by the way, that episode, I wrote it down. It's how Christina Wise went from handouts to financial freedom. It aired here on Money Ripples podcast on 10/25/2024. I highly encourage anyone checking this out to go back and listen to that as well, because it'll help you really understand what we're sharing here. Beautifully done, and it just really reinforces the point that we're both making here about the value of the microphone.
It's so true because I've had bigger name podcast or bigger name guests than Christina, but I had several people. You're right, not just yourself, but other people reached out afterwards, even clients saying, "Wow, that was an awesome episode." And if you get to know her in real life, like we're actually starting to work on creating something together. You know, we're not doing official release of this yet, but you guys are kind of hearing it a little bit. But we actually are looking to release something together, and that's and she's a very like private, quiet person, but you could tell she's authentic, and that's part of our branding too. Is that people are just real. They are who they are. Whether you see them on camera or meet them in person, they are the same person, front stage and backstage. And that interview was kind of the impetus for me too, to want to do business with her as well.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
Yeah. Well, tell us more about like PodMatch, and really like where do you see people get the best benefits? Like, what do they do? I know you have little short tutorial videos that kind of talk about this already, but where do you find people getting the best results with PodMatch?
Yeah, I'll speak to both sides, guest and host. I'll go quicker on the host side because I think that the our fellow Ripplers here today are probably more likely to be on the guest side. But just quickly for the host, it's really the streamlining of the processes. We did a lot of data research before we went into this, and on average, it takes about 3 hours and 14 emails back and forth for someone to get fully booked onto a podcast. And for hosts, that's a lot of time. Like, a host is
Yeah.
also going to edit; they're going to do intros, outro, like all the things. Listen, podcasting is a labor of love. And we were like, man, can we just automate that inside of PodMatch for them? Now it's for the guest as well, but the host was our priority on that because, like, we know they have more work when this is done. Like today, Chris, when you let me go, I'm gonna go do something, right? And you're like, all right, now the work begins, right? So it's like, could we somehow find a way to do that? So on the host side, it was really about streamlining the whole thing for them. On the guest side, it was a matter of really putting the right host in front of them
Mm.
and knowing that the hosts are actually active because you might know this data, Chris, but listeners will find this interesting. There are not very many active podcasts. Yeah, everyone talks about like, hey, we're above 3 million podcasts, and some places show more than that, but there's less than 400,000 shows that are actually producing episodes. And so you think that's not a lot. And so what we hated seeing is people like, oh, I wanted to podcast guest, but I reached out to 30 podcasts and only one of them was still doing their show. So we wanted to build a system where, like, hey, if they're on Podmatch, they are actively podcasting. Because if they're not, we actually remove them. Like, these are people that are saying, I am looking for a guest. And that helps you know that I'm not this outreach is not going to be in vain. And to me, that's like one of the beautiful things. Is just it's a system where everyone is already looking for each other, right? And so we're able just to make that connection really fast. And more recently, some of the value we've done is streamlined more of the processes and even added two things within AI. And I'm not an AI feature guy. Like, I don't really enjoy the AI features that have been added to all the social media platforms because I don't know if there's really like a use case for it. But we do have one. We have really robust profiles, both on the guest and host side. And AI is only as good as the information you feed it. We feed it really good information. It's able to say, here's where you two, Alex and Chris, align as a match. Here's why. And then before the interview, it tells you, Chris, like, here's a few questions you can ask Alex that no one's ever asked him, but your audience would really like. And the flip side tells me, Alex, this is how you need to show up for Chris. This is how you need to show up for his audience. And this is the takeaway that the listener should get from it, right? It's not telling you what to do, but it's helping cut back on some of the research. These are a few of the things that I'm really, really excited about inside of PodMatch. And for me, I know I said it close to the beginning. It's all about removing the friction involved, putting the right people together faster, helping them spend more time behind the microphone, less time in the weeds of it, right? Because that's what really serves listeners. At the end of the day, that's what we're all about.
Love it, man. That's true. I can test from my end, my standpoint too is, I mean, one, it's not, I mean, I'll find people that are all obviously have an active podcast, but even just trying to, find the right ones, and you've got big names too. It's not like it's always this obscure small podcast. I mean, there are people that I think, wow, you're bigger than my show, and sometimes we've even done podcast swaps with each other too, where that creates, an awesome opportunity as well. So, I know it's great. I actually, everybody, I do have a link in the show notes here. You guys can go and find PodMatch and check it out. And yes, Alex does send me a little thank you. It's not much, but it's awesome. But regardless of that, guys, even if he didn't pay me a dime to refer you to PodMatch, I've already referred several friends that I've never got paid on to say, check this out. This is an amazing platform to use. So much simpler, so much easier, and really, if you're looking to get booked on podcasts and you're committed to that, I mean, I think I remember the first month or two I did use PodMatch last year. I mean, man, I think I got booked on like 20 shows in like a month just
Wow.
with PodMatch. I was like, man, like I could. It got to the point where I was like, okay, I got to back off a little bit. I got to take a break for a month just so I can catch my breath and then do it again. And
Yeah,
so
that's a
it was.
lot, man. That's only you, Chris. Good job.
Well, I was trying to win all your points because you gamified it a little bit on that thing. So I was like, I got to get in that top 10 somehow. How do I get the top 10? I got there for like a day or two and then I fell off the chart. But, I was like, that's all I wanted. I just want to get in the top 10 at least. But man, it was intense. I'll tell you that much. But I mean, I've had so many great opportunities, made great relationships from that as well, even going beyond after the podcast. And I think that's what really matters. If you're a business owner, is it's not about just showing up and just pitching your crap, because that's not it. It's like we said, like Christina did, right? It's share your story, share some value with the audience members that can help them in their life, and the rest of it just follows.
It's so true. I think this is another really good point on being a podcast guest or host. The more pitching you do, the less people take action on it. I typically find, which sounds weird. You're like, wait, that doesn't make sense. But people, again, they're developing that relationship with you. They're hearing you talk. Like if I came on here and I just wouldn't even let Chris talk or interview me because I had so much to say, no matter what my call to action is, you're not going to take it because you're going to be like, that dude was annoying, right? And Chris is not going to air that episode, but let's just say he did, right? But if I show up here and I just add value, I just show up to serve, I don't talk about my own stuff. If you like me, you're probably going to look it up. And Chris likes what I do. He mentioned it. He's going to mention it in show notes and stuff. Like I don't need to even do that. Show up, add a ton of value. I find that nothing is more valuable than doing that when it comes to podcasting.
I love it, man. Well, last question for you, and this question, obviously, if you've watched some episodes recently, you already know it's coming. But money ripples, right? We talk about the ripple effect you create through people's lives, and kind of what you're here to do on this planet. What do you feel is your ripple effect here, Alex?
Yeah, I knew the question was coming, Chris, but I perfectly like purposely didn't script it out. I like to like kind of like leave that, let it flow naturally and organically. It actually reminds me of something that you talked about on a recent solo episode you did. You're talking about the overcoming the fear of investing, and you talked about like your past experiences cause anxiety, and but what you said really resonated with me. It's what I really feel as well. Who we are today is not who we were yesterday, but who we were yesterday can help someone else bridge the gap to understand how they can become a better version of themselves. And so for me, when I think about podcasting, I think about the impact I'm making on people's lives. It's not who we were, it's more where we're going, but helping others find that way through podcasting. And I really think that's the beauty of it. Like I've never had a
Yeah,
guest who is perfect, who has arrived, right? Instead, it's people on a journey who just transparently share the whole thing. And when I listen to podcasts, that's what I want to hear too. It's somebody that's another human, like Christina, sharing that story about how she went from where she was to where she is and how others can do the same. To me, I think that the legacy that I leave, and when it comes to the ripples, is yes, I get paid for this, but ultimately I tie it to how many episodes are getting released that are really serving people and helping them have this own self reflection and just improvement in their own lives. And the more that's what I track at PodMatch. I legitimately don't look at our numbers metrics. I look how many podcast episodes are getting released because of what we have here. That's the value. That's the ripple effect. That's the impact I'm able to make. And yes, dollars are tied to it for me. I'm very thankful for that. I'm blessed for that. But I always remember the people first and foremost.
Yeah, that's so true. I never even thought of it from that standpoint, but it really is like your journey is that thing that can create a ripple effect too. It creates a wake behind you, but it creates a wake that others can follow along, right?
Yeah. I mean, I hope it was okay. We took a different approach on that. I was like, I think I know where I want to go here.
No, I loved it. I think it's
Good.
great. I think a lot of us can follow along with that because I think many people won't do podcasts because they feel intimidated, feeling that, like you said, they haven't arrived. But it's not
Right.
about that. It's about wherever you are in your journey and how that can help guide somebody else along that could be going through something very, very similar.
Right. Yeah.
So love that answer. Well, thank you so much, Alex. Again, appreciate your time today. I mean, fantastic stuff. And again, thank you so much for being willing to take that chance in 2020 to even create a business that is really blessed my life too.
Cool. Well, Chris, I appreciate it, man. Thank you again for having me. It was truly an honor to be here.
Absolutely. Anybody, hey, if you want to check out PodMatch, we got the link, like I said, in the show notes there. Check it out, see if it's for you. But I'll tell you, like for me personally, it's been a huge blessing in my life. So, guys, the biggest thing for you is what kind of ripple effect are you going to create from this point forward? What will you do with your life? And from your standpoint, where you're standing right now, that's what's going to make the difference of the future life you're going to have. Go and make it a wonderful and prosperous week. And we'll see you later.